Hello, everyone. I hope you're having a nice day in school. I'm going to tape record this Ronald Reagan lesson for you. It's actually my third attempt here. My dog is not cooperating this evening. But let us begin with the economic policies of the 40th president. But the best way to start is by reviewing a little bit of what you did yesterday. So, first of all, great job with the slides. I was very impressed. It was far more detailed than you'll need to know. But this is really the summary of the 1970s. So you have all these bad economic conditions. All right, inflation is on the rise. The value of the dollar is going down. You have high unemployment, and there's really no economic growth. They even came up with a new term, stagflation, stagnant economy, and rising inflation. But really, the crux of the problems of the 1970s were these gas lines, the oil crisis really led to a lot of people's frustrations. We were only able to get gas on every other day, odd days and even days. People were stealing gas from each other. They were siphoning it out of their like behind the license plate is where the gas tanks used to be. And they were even stealing license plates because it was based on your last number. So this really defines, for many people, the economic turmoil of the 1970s. Now, just to transition briefly into something you would do on the exam, this is a short answer question. So explain briefly why one of the following was the most significant factor in the decline of public confidence in the United States government during the 1970s. Now, there isn't a correct answer. You could choose any of the three as long as you can defend it. You haven't learned about foreign policy yet. That would be mostly the Vietnam War and maybe our policy in the Middle East. You have learned about the economy. So, what I just summarized, which you did in class yesterday, you could write that and easily get credit. You haven't done politics yet. That would be the Watergate scandal. But I keep telling you about the big picture. This doesn't require you to know every single fact. It requires you to be able to identify what was happening during the 1970s. That's why I keep emphasizing that phrase, big picture. All right, but now let's transition to the 40th president, Ronald Reagan. Let's find out how he got elected. I think this is one of my favorite lines. I just think it's brilliant. So he's running against Jimmy Carter, and as we know, there's a bad economic climate in the country. So during the campaign, he used this line: "A recession is when your neighbor loses his job. A depression is when you lose yours. And a recovery is when Jimmy Carter loses his." And first, I hope somebody's laughing. And it really just gets to the essence of Reagan's personality. I mean, he just, regardless of your political views, so many people were drawn to his charisma. And again, think about it. Who really can define a recession economically? Who can really come up with it? That's when your neighbor loses his job. Now, a depression, we know high unemployment, the Great Depression, so that hits you. And then the zinger, recovery, is when Jimmy Carter, the incumbent president, loses his job. And you'll see it was pretty much a landslide. There's your electoral college map there. I'm in the way of the states that he won, but we'll just move me up here. I can't move myself. Sorry about that. But there's even these group of people that call themselves Reagan Democrats. That's how strong his support was across party lines. Reagan was a Republican. Ronald Reagan was a Republican. But they were Democrats that for 8 years they had his vote. So who was this guy, Ronald Reagan? Um, Born in Illinois, he was an actor, he was an athlete, and he went to Eureka College, probably not a school many of us were familiar with. He worked as a radio broadcaster for sports, but then he went to Hollywood to be an actor, and he became very famous. I'm not great with my old movies, but I think there's a story about Newt Rockney, who was a Notre Dame football player, but Reagan played, I think the guy's name was George Gipp. I apologize if I'm wrong. So his nickname was the Gipper. That used to become one of his nicknames. And but then he transitioned to politics and he did become governor of California. And he happened to be our first divorced president. Now, tragedy hit Reagan 2 months into his presidency. So or maybe even 2 months in. I'm sorry, March, I believe. So he's shot by John Hinckley Jr. He, as well as his Secret Service agent James Brady. Here's John Hinckley down here. John Hinckley. He said he did it because he was in love with this actress Jodie Foster. He was stalking her on the campus of Yale. But obviously Reagan lived. James Brady was paralyzed from the waist down. We actually signed the Brady Bill, which was a gun regulation requiring background checks before you could purchase a gun. But believe it or not, John Hinckley Jr. is now he's out. He was actually let out of jail short time ago. He actually lives in Williamsburg, Virginia, in a gated community where one of my relatives lives as well. But he does wear an ankle bracelet. Okay, so now let's get to the crux of Ronald Reagan's policy. So the first year, he was going to send a message to unions. All right, there was a whole group of air traffic controllers, the people who decide, to make sure that the airplanes do not crash into each other, and they went on strike. I mean, looking for better union recognition, better wages, conditions, the usual worker complaints. And Reagan said to them, "You have 48 hours to go back to work, or else I'm going to fire all of you." And he did fulfill that promise. So one of his first acts, again, difficult economic time, transition to a new president, but he did get rid of over 11,000 workers. So, and then retrain new people. So it shows that he was not going to allow unions to stronghold him. And some people love this, and some people don't like it. All I do is deliver the facts for you. Now is really the crux, though, of Reagan's economic policy. So it's known as Reaganomics. Now I can simplify it for you, and I can make it more complex. The simple version of Reaganomics is we're going to cut taxes. And if we cut taxes, people have more money. And if people have more money, they'll spend it or they will invest it, and it'll be good for the overall economy. So the more official name is supply side economics, but it's again economic theory that if we cut people's taxes, they will do good things with that money for the economy. So look at how far that top rate went. It went from 70% all the way down to 28%. I know this is not the easiest topic for people. I know your age. Tax policy is not the most exciting, but hopefully you have just a base understanding of it. So again, 70% down to 28%. Now that's not the only tax he cut. He also cut the corporate tax. That's different than your income tax. He cut the inheritance tax. When you inherit money at a certain level, you have to pay taxes. If you give money as a gift, you have to pay taxes. He lowered that. If you make money on an investment, it's called capital gains. You have to pay taxes on that as well. So he cut all of those taxes. But the one most people pay attention to is the income tax. And then one other thing he did, he allowed people to invest money. This is largely middle class people who will invest money and not pay taxes on it until after they collect their dividends. And it's called an IRA, and it really allowed more people to invest in the stock market. So I hope that gives you a good general overview of what Reaganomics is. That's what most people focus on. Again, don't ask me, is it good or is it bad? That's for you to decide. But now that's not the only part of his economic policy. So I want to give you the whole picture. So in addition to that, he signed a lot of different acts that made it, let's just say, deregulation of industry. So he's very much a proponent of having fewer laws from the government regulating business. This is one of his famous quotes. And I'm going to give you tomorrow in class a whole list of things he said. He goes, "Government is not a solution to our problem. Government is the problem." That's just one example of how he felt. He really he's very much a proponent of laissez-faire economics and limited government. He even cut many of the social programs, such as food stamps and student loans, and I think the budget from transportation as well. So all of this is consistent with conservative economic policies. But again, that's not the whole picture. So hold on one second. Let me do that. Okay. So now there are two taxes he actually increased. One was the Social Security tax. So he did increase that tax to help continue to pay for a program that was pretty popular. But I don't think a lot of people realize. Okay, now another tax that he actually increased was the gas tax. We pay gas taxes, to city, state, but there is a federal gas tax that's used to fund infrastructure improvements throughout the country. And he increased it from 4 to 9 cents a gallon. So again, conventional wisdom or understanding of Reagan is that he just cut all taxes. He cut most taxes. But to know it accurately, he did increase that Social Security tax, and he did increase the gas tax. And again, increasing taxes is more of a liberal plan. But I'm giving you as many of the facts, of course, as I can. If you think I've left anything out, please call me out on it in class. Now, the last big topic for him is immigration reform. Again, another fact. This is a quote from him after his first election. But he did sign a bill that provided amnesty for approximately 3 million people who were living here as undocumented workers. Now, they did have to pay a fine. They did have to demonstrate they have not been arrested for any crimes while they've been here. And then the other part of this immigration reform bill was that workers now had to attest to the immigration status of their employee. I'm sorry, owners had to attest to the immigration status of their employees. He did try to have some sort of like a temporary worker program where we could bring people in to work in agriculture. But this was, something that Reagan proudly stood behind, giving amnesty to those 3 million people. Okay, so that gives you, I think, a pretty good rundown of Ronald Reagan's economic policies as president. Hopefully it's clear to you. Again, the basics here are that he generally did believe in huge tax cuts for the wealthy, but for as many people as possible, and cut many of the other taxes that I mentioned. He was very much in favor of deregulation. These are all conservative ideas. Definitely wants to cut spending programs. However, the two taxes that he did increase, he did increase Social Security tax, and he did increase the gas tax. Those are the two. And lastly is that immigration reform bill. So that gives you I think, a pretty good picture of what Ronald Reagan stood for economically. Now, I can't really finish the last two slides for you, okay? What is his legacy? Probably more so than most presidents. There are people who will say, at least for modern era, some people will say he was their absolute favorite president, and some people will say that his legacy is completely overrated. But again, that's for you to investigate and form your own opinions. This is a cartoon that criticizes Ronald Reagan's policy. The trickle-down theory is really referring to it negatively. There's the theory, where's all the money going to trickle down? But in reality, there's not much coming down here. I've seen cartoons that's, have somebody looking up, where's my trickle? But a very recent poll, this is 2018, had him as the best president. I think it was like 28% people said he was the best president since World War II. So hopefully this gives you a little idea of his legacy. I will put the brief assignment on Google Classroom for you to answer. Make sure you do so by the end of this period. Feel free to watch any other videos if you have some time, and also feel free to read up on the notes that I've left on Google Classroom. So that is my attempt at Ronald Reagan's economic policies, and we will have more Ronald Reagan tomorrow in class. Send me any messages if you have any. Take care, everyone.